in the book.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, for being here. We really, really appreciate you coming and talking about what you're about. And I know you're running for school board candidate, so thank you. And now this time is all yours. Okay. Oh, everyone on the chat, everyone in the room, Carol, Victor, be nice. It's a bookstore, we're kind people, it's a welcoming kind of place, so want kindness all around.
Thank you for having me. Island Books is an institution I think is many people believe on the island, and so it's a pleasure to be here. Like in college, my favorite place was the library. It was the Frost Library, which was dedicated by Kennedy at the school, not the most architecturally nicest. And my favorite room was like the basement level, because that's when you can, where the old books were, and you got the distinct smell of books. So it's always a pleasure to be in a bookstore. I thought I'd begin quickly by just saying a little bit about myself, why I'm running, and my background. So I was born and raised in the area. I moved to Mercer Island as a freshman in high school and attended Mercer Island High School, graduated the last year of the millennium in 1999. Then I went to college on the East Coast at Amherst College. I chose that because it was a small school with a large international student body. And I thought that in that setting, I would meet a lot of people from different backgrounds and perspectives, which turned out to be the case. That's where I met my wife, who is an international student from Romania. We started dating my senior year, fell in love and got married a few years later. And then fast forwarding a number of years, we were on the East Coast before graduate school, like had fun going to the MoMA and seeing like the retrospective of Miyazaki that was playing there, and sort of the life before kids. I then went to grad school at the University of Michigan, where I got my law degree. My wife got her PhD in economics. Had a son, my oldest Eli. Lived in the East Coast and then came back when my son was just under 2 years old, because I'm from this area. My wife had been a number of times, and we both love nature and the opportunity to raise a family in this environment. We then had a daughter, Matea, and moved to the island when my son was beginning kindergarten because of the schools here. We moved into the house that I grew up in with my in-laws. My parents moved out to an apartment in Bellevue and my 2 kids. During the pandemic, we added 2 cats and last week a dog, so it's a full house. My son is a 6th grader at Islander Middle School, and my daughter is a 4th grader at West Mercer. I decided to run for school board because I think Mercer Island is an utterly unique community. We're an island in the middle of a freshwater lake surrounded by a metropolis that's remaking the world. I think our school districts should reflect that. A piece of trivia: we're the 2nd most populated island in a freshwater lake anywhere in the world. The only island that has more people is Ometepe in Lake Nicaragua, but nowhere near a metropolitan center. And I think what that means in terms of identity, passion, and potential is significant. I was running, or am running, because I was concerned that the current board and administration lacks the appropriate perspective and process. By perspective, I mean what I just said, that we're unique. I think everyone that lives here knows that we're very fortunate to live here. And the problems and challenges that we face are different than in other districts. And by process, it's acknowledging that we are a small community that's well informed, and it's opening up the doors and explaining why decisions are made and the rationale behind it. There's no reason that significant changes should be undertaken without data and without discussion. My background in law was begun in financial restructuring. It was the class that I got the highest mark in at the University of Michigan, on a textbook written by Elizabeth Warren. And what I learned from that is when you have times of financial distress, you need to get all the stakeholders in a room and come up with a plan, multiple plans, discuss it. And you don't need consensus, but you need buy-in by the appropriate, sufficient number of stakeholders. That's what the district needs to do. It's not making decisions behind closed doors. It's presenting facts, it's listening to the community, and then it's forging ahead with a plan. I haven't seen that, which is the reason that I'm running.
So we have a question. Ashley Hay would like to know, what are the 2 to 3, not 23, most important things for the district to focus on in the year ahead?
So the most important, without question, is the financial situation we find ourselves in. The district is running a $7 million deficit. It is quite possible that before the end of the school year, we'll be financially insolvent. And the reason for this is we've lost 400 students in the last year alone. It's not because these students have dropped out of school. They're going to school somewhere. It's because the community has lost faith and confidence in the district. So what that means is we need to present various plans. The board needs to require that the administration present various plans and options and lay it on the table, and then explain why we are pursuing a path before we embark on a path. I feel that the current administration frequently feels that any pushback by the community is a deficit in communication, but that's not the case. It's not just having a plan, it's getting to it in the right way by involving stakeholders. It's then, and then it's implementing the plan successfully. So what that means here is there's going to be staffing adjustments. There's going to be trade-offs. We need to be honest about that, and we need to have a discussion of what the best way to do that. And I think also we need to very conscientiously reach out to those students that are still on the island, but have left for private school or online, and see what it would take to get them back. The second most important thing for the district is being transparent. It has not been forthcoming with data or explanation, or even objective criteria when it implements new plans of how success will be achieved. Without that, there's no accountability. We live in a community where many people work in the tech sector, and it's not just having a good idea, it's also saying how success will be measured and showing that it works. I don't think we've seen that from the administration so far.
Thank you.
Are there more questions online or?
Not yet. Not yet. Sure. Yeah, they're thinking about what you just said.
Carol, do you?
Yeah, I thought of a question, but it flew away.
I guess I can answer a question that was posed to me yesterday via email, which was, what are my thoughts on STEM versus the humanities? I don't think that there is a trade-off of one to the other. They're mutually reinforcing. One of the books that I read in the last year that heavily influenced me was The Invention of Nature by Andrea Wolf, a biography on Alexander von Humboldt, to the Humboldt current, the Humboldt penguins. That's all the same individual who crossed paths with Thoreau, Jefferson, Napoleon. And what became clear is that his creativity scientifically and recognizing current streams and climate topographical maps that shows what vegetation exists at different elevations was informed by also a romantic sensibility that came from literature. So I don't think that there's a trade-off between a STEM-focused curriculum or a humanities. I think what's important is that we have one with high academic standards and that's rigorous and engages students. Now more than ever, with online distraction and screens and gamification, it's important that we keep students engaged and help them find their passion wherever that may be.
So as a board member, what is your, or I should say a school board member, what's your role in that?
So I think first and foremost, in the current place we find ourselves, it's finding a superintendent that will be able to, has a proven track record of success. And I think comes from a background that's from a district that has a similar profile.
Actually, I have profile role. Will you just repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was, is the role is a board member. What's my role? And when it comes to STEM, versus humanities and ensuring that academics are high standards and rigorous. I think the first is selecting a superintendent that shares a similar viewpoint. And in looking for that, I would look for a superintendent that comes from a background with a district with high academic standards that has shown that the humanities and STEM are compatible and are not exclusive. I think it's also, once the superintendent has been selected, is having objective criteria to show that students are learning. And I think there's a variety of ways to do that. I recognize that tests are by no means perfect and they have distortions, but I think it is a metric that is important for data. And so I think it's selecting the correct superintendent, and then it's holding them accountable through data.
There was a recent Good Morning America newsnet on Mercer Island and the pressure that the kids feel for high achievement. And I have talked with several parents and they're very good parents. They are not pressuring the children, the students, I should say. The students are pressuring themselves and needing counseling. And is there anything you think the school district can do to alleviate this situation?
Yeah, so I will repeat the question. It was about, I think, a CBS Sunday Morning piece on the pressures on Mercer Island in a high-performing, high-achieving school district and what can be done about it. So I think first and foremost, it's adequately funding Mercer Island Youth and Family Services. Thankfully, it's a one-time, unfortunately, but there's surplus funds at the city level because of CARES dollars. And so we're adequately funded for the time being. I think long-term, it's having a sustainable funding to make sure that there's a sufficient number of counselors, both for students, but also for the community at large. I think second, outside of making sure that we have adequate mental health professionals available, it's allowing students to find their passion. To quote Susan Orleans, who wrote The Orchid Thief, that was then turned into the movie adaptation with a screenplay by Charlie Kaufman, the world is so vast that the only way to make sense of it is to find something small that you're passionate about. And for me, it's nature, backpacking, canoeing, cycling. When I feel stressed out, that's where I go to relax. And everyone's different. It can be chess or reading or knitting, radio broadcast. What the school district can do is to provide as many enriching opportunities as possible, not so that students can check a box, but so they can genuinely find what they're passionate about. And to quote Steve Jobs, passionate people change the world. And I believe that, both in terms of improving the world, but also for one's own mental health.
Do you think the focus on AP classes has added to their anxiety?
So the question was, do I think the focus on AP classes has added to the anxiety? No, I do not. The reality is that what causes pressure is that upon graduation, students will be looking, the vast majority, 93+%, to go to a higher education in the district. And so there will be a selection criteria in whatever form that may take. I've actually heard in some ways just the opposite, that those who want to go to a STEM-focused university such as MIT find that the school does not offer the appropriate level of math courses, so they have to take a summer calculus AB course in order so they can take calculus BC, which isn't offered at our high school, and find it on their own. So no, I think actually just the opposite. There is always, unfortunately, going to be pressure when there's a selection criteria at the end of the day. What's important is instilling perspective in the present and passion so that people understand that life is much more than that.
We do have a question online from Erin. Thank you, Erin. It's a long one, so I'm going to read it clearly so that you don't have to repeat it. What role do you believe the board has or should have in ensuring that schools and the administration are responsive to parent concerns regarding pandemic-related issues or other large-scale issues that the community might face in the future? Basically, as an elected official, how can a board member best represent constituents given limitations in the board foundational policies authority? Let me know if you want me to repeat it.
No, I'm good. So the board and the administration has not been proactive during this pandemic. They have looked to the county and to the state for guidance and for direction. I believe that in unprecedented circumstance, leadership requires taking initiative. We saw in private schools that students were able to attend safely and without incident. And rather than look if similar procedures could be duplicated, we waited far too long. I think some of the concrete steps the district could have taken is within a few months establishing a pandemic task force comprised of professionals in suitable professions from the island, attorneys, doctors, educators, not in order to hand off the reins. I think the decision-making responsibility needs to remain with the district as directed by the board, but in order to get input, to have consultation rights. The district hasn't done that. I think also it's had a failure of communication. The superintendent did not send an email until 13 days after the schools were shut. The individual that I'm running against did not ask a single question for three board meetings after the schools were shut. When you're in the midst of a crisis, you have to act. Shackleton famously set out on the Endurance, and it was originally a mission of exploration that became one of survival. You have to pivot. I haven't seen that with the district. They were looking to implement the most sweeping changes of the curriculum for the elementary and middle school levels last spring, when it was clear there was going to be an enormous educational learning loss, as well as the cost of social isolation on students. Yet they plowed ahead and felt that they could, proverbially walk and chew gum at the same time. And sometimes you can't. You have to prioritize what the most pressing matters are and adapt to circumstances. So yeah, I think the district could have done much more. On my website, on my Facebook campaign website, I wrote a link about some concrete steps I think the district could have taken, including establishing a pandemic task force.
So can you go into a little bit more detail on what the differences are between you and your opponent?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, if I could just talk in brief of some of the differences between myself and the opponent. The individual I'm running against, Brian, is extraordinarily dedicated. I don't think anyone questions that. Spends an enormous amount of time, both locally as well as regionally and nationally, on education-related issues. However, there is a difference between issues that are important at the local school board level that can be affected and what may be and what's going on at the regional or national level. To choose one example, my opponent wrote on his blog about the digital divide. There's no question that during the pandemic, that was a serious issue for many people in the country, particularly in rural communities. It's not on Mercer Island. I recognize there is a percentage of students that are more economically challenged, but we've addressed that through one laptop, one iPad per student, through Wi-Fi hotspots. So I think it's safe to say that there is no urgent need on the island here, and that for those that have issues, that we're more than able to, to satisfy those. Similarly, the school to prison pipeline, not an issue on Mercer Island, is very important at the national level. You read a book such as Cast by Isabel Wilkinson, and that becomes clear. Or like, even more so, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. But again, at the local level, not an issue. We're a unique community, as I've begun with. Our vaccination rate, one of the highest, if not the highest in the country. Being a local school board member is responding to local facts. What are the facts that we're presented with here? We're presented with 10% of students dropping out of our school district and what that means for the budget. We're presented with how do you balance the pressures when 90% plus go on to college and many to elite colleges. How do you find that for those who are not going to the top universities, how do their needs be addressed and it isn't lost by focusing on the top 10%? There's a lot of challenges that we face, but we need to be realistic of what those challenges are, identify them, and then have a plan for addressing it.
Melanie Mayer has a question. Thank you, Melanie. Facing a budget deficit, how would you approach making the hard choices about what gets maintained and what has to be cut or reduced?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing, particularly what I learned from my early days in financial restructuring, is you need multiple plans and alternatives and understand what the trade-offs are. There are going to be difficult choices, but Tam Den, a current school board member who's endorsed me, she voted against the cuts the small cuts that were proposed and then enacted last spring. Not because she didn't realize that cuts needed to be made, but the fashion in which they were presented. There wasn't a dialogue between the administration and the board. The administration presented their proposal and it was an up or down vote. That needs to change, particularly when we're looking at it at a large scale. So what are the trade-offs? What does the data say? Like are we going to need to reevaluate class size? Is it going to come at the expense of extracurriculars and enrichment? And let's be honest, we're adults here. I think we can have a grown-up conversation, but it needs to be done transparently and openly and explained.
So I'd like to ask a follow-up to that. Twisting it a little bit. Because there's a lot of, you talked about a insolvency, you just were asked about cuts. Is it possible to look at it the other way and think about how do you bring that 10% back?
Yes, well, in part. So a number of those students, and the data is still being developed, is that a number of students have moved off island, that we live in a very international community. Some people have decided that perhaps the education they can get in another country is better than the one here. At least that's what the numbers suggest. And anecdotally, from people that are friends that my children have been in class with, that's proven to be the case. But for those that remain, I think we do. And part of that is taking it more seriously. Right now, apparently there has been exit surveys done, but it's just at the school level. It's not coordinated or done at the district level. I find that frankly a bit appalling. So I think without question, we need to look at that because each student is additional like funding dollars. And when we have a district that's already small, it becomes more challenging for district-wide programs to be able to sustain it.
I'll keep going.
You keep going.
Yeah.
I will let you know.
Okay, so if I'm doing my math correctly, you graduated in 1999. So can you compare and contrast the Mercer Island School District that you graduated from with the one that exists? And what are the parts that you would keep and bring forward? What would you not take, and how would you go about doing it?
Yeah, so the question was to contrast when I graduated from Mercer Island High School in 1999 and the current situation. So when I graduated, Mercer Island was without question the best high school in the state. I still felt upon going to the East Coast that it wasn't necessarily the best in the country. The place we find ourselves in now is Mercer Island is once again the best district in the state, but the high school isn't. And I think there's no reason for that. The high school in many ways is, that's what it leads up to. Like that's the end product of our district. And the fact that the Bellevue school districts now have the top high schools in the state and not us shouldn't be the case. So I think there's room to improve there. And I think nationally, we're ranked maybe 208th in the way these rankings go. I see no reason we shouldn't be much, much higher than that and be able to compete with any school district on the East Coast, such as Long Neck or Great Neck and some of the others. On some of the positive sides, when I graduated and then went to college, I was exposed in a meaningful way for the first time to people from different backgrounds in communities, like the LGBTQ community. And when I graduated from the high school, I don't think it was much quieter, it was much smaller. So I think diversity and acceptance and inclusion has come a huge way. I mean, society has, and that's been reflected in our school district. So I think there are definitely some things that have improved immensely. I think one of the other big challenges is when I graduated, when I was born in 1981, it's sometimes referred to as the Star Wars generation. Sort of straddled like the digital analog divide. So I had a cell phone, but it didn't have it was just for calling people. And I was one of the few people that had one. That's changed. And I think that what that means for mental health and well-being when one looks at like the studies is not encouraging. Um, I I know anecdotally, I'm a member of the Shore Club, and I was there one morning and heard someone that sounded like a bulimic in the toilet. So I think there's a lot of challenges for mental health, in large part, I think, because of social media, that the district, like all districts, um, face challenges and need to do their best to support students.
Do you have concerns about the incursion of religious beliefs on the curriculum, like I have seen on various social media, strong objections to reproductive health classes?
Sure, so I'll repeat the question. So the question was about religious beliefs, and in particular, the effect it has on sex ed and the curriculum. So what the school district is required to teach is set at the state level by the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reichdahl. So to a large extent, what topics we need to cover in order to receive state funding are set in law. So there's not a ton of flexibility on that. Where we do have control is to be transparent with parents what it is we're teaching, to have office hours, Q&A, so that parents that have concerns, they can express them, but in a friendly environment where they can be informed of what exactly we're teaching and why. And I think in part of that, something that needs to be taught as well, that I sort of mentioned earlier in a different context, but is the role of social media and making sure that when we cover sex ed, that it's explored in depth in terms of both for legal liability, for safety, for a number of reasons.
So I want to go back to the earlier discussion that we were having. So what does it actually take to achieve parity with the school district like Great Neck, or even do better than that? What does it take? And similar to my previous question, what is the school board's role in that?
So in order to do that, we need to continue offering. Sorry. The question was, if we're to become an excellent school district nationally, like Great Neck, I think Highland Park is up there. What does it take to accomplish that? I think part of it is continuing to offer challenging courses to those that seek it and that are capable of it. I think part of it is doing something that we did 20 years ago, and perhaps it's time for a refresh. It was called a benchmark study. One of the former school board members who's endorsed me, along with four total former school board members, 2 current ones, Ken Glass, served at a time where they did a benchmark study, and they looked at 20 top school districts in the country, and maybe one private school, Lakeside, locally, and looked at the various criteria and how we compare. And the takeaway at that time, in terms of what was in our control, was that we did not offer enough AP courses. And we changed as a result. The data was presented. It was presented at a forum that was attended by 600 individuals, according to Ken. I think we need to go back to that. Conduct a survey and analysis of what it would take, and then present the data and tell the public why we're pursuing a particular path. But it needs to be transparent. It needs to be data-driven. I think some other opportunities here that are perhaps a little more peripheral is looking to how we can, particularly with climate change, being such a pressing issue that the world faces, but in particularly for the generation that's graduating, and how we can instill a faith and confidence to address that. We live in an inspirational landscape. There's places like the North Cascade Institute on Ross Lake that I think we could consider partnering with, and also use it as an opportunity to work with other districts in Seattle and neighboring areas where students can be exposed to a variety of different backgrounds and experiences, but meet on a level playing field where no one feels like they're at a deficit.
Toe scratch.
Can you tell us about a Mercer Island teacher that inspired you?
Yeah, Ruthie Newman. Like that's an easy one for me.
You gotta repeat the question.
Oh, if I could say a Mercer Island teacher that inspired me, for me it was Ruthie Newman. I've talked with other people that had similar experiences. She was just phenomenal. She taught a humanities course a senior year. At that time, it wasn't deemed an AP course, and I don't think it always needs to have a label of being AP, but it was an advanced English course with philosophy. The reading that she required was immense. I think in large part, I can trace my love for books and reading to Ruthie Newman. The amount of time she spent marking up papers and giving meaningful feedback and comments was incredible. She recently, I think at age 88, passed away last year. But yeah, she was truly an incredible individual.
I could ask the online people if they have any questions. I'm not hearing any.
Okay.
Is there anything that you like to let the people online know?
Or actually, why don't we put it this way? Is there a question that you had either hoped we asked or thought we would ask that we haven't asked?
No. Although actually there is one that I would like for concluding. I heard through the grapevine that the concluding question and other, so I'm not sure if we're there yet.
Yeah, we're not.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we could go there, but you don't get to ask the question. I'll ask
Okay.
them then. Okay. So are we ready for that question?
If there's nothing else Daniel wants to say, I don't have any more questions online.
Okay. So
Okay.
the question is, what is your spirit animal? And yesterday we got a little bit of pushback. So if you don't like the term spirit animal, what is it? What is the animal that inspires you?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's actually pretty easy. I just heard this question like as I was coming here, but it's Chewbacca. And the reason I say Chewbacca is I'm a cyclist,
Yeah.
and my wife I like Uniqlo shirts, and they did a collaboration with Star Wars. And for a number of years pre-pandemic, before cycling events, to sort of get myself in a mindset to do well in sort of that headspace. And I particularly like long endurance events like STP one day. I would wear Chewbacca for 1 or 2 or 3 days before, as it's loyalty and perseverance, and also I think just the image, the one that I had was like Chewbacca in the snow and just marching forward. And I guess going back to Shackleton, like sort of the fictional version of that.
So I actually have a follow-up to that, which is I've actually never thought of Chewbacca as being an animal. What makes Chewbacca an animal? I thought it was just another being.
So should I repeat?
Yeah.
So the question is,
Why not? I mean,
yeah, is Chewbacca, Victor said, is just another being rather than an animal. And I guess my response to that, I think, is we're all animals.
Right.
I just recently got a dog, a Labrador, Rosie, and the incredible creature. But I think at the end of the day, we're all creatures, which is one of the reasons I love cycling. Is I feel particularly at the end of a long event when you're sort of frayed and it's just input output and it's calories in and watts out, that it sort of reduces it to that basic element. And for me, it also, when I'm cycling, I think I no longer think in words. And so Chewbacca is a spirit animal I also identify with.
Very nice. Yeah,
Thank you
no,
for having
thank
me.
you for coming here and being part of this. And thank you everyone online for watching.
Yep.
No, 100% thank you. This was very helpful information, even Star Wars chat. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Daniel.